And welcome back to our live broadcast of the sitting of the Senate. We have just come back from our lunch break, and I am your anchor for today, Jacques Hinkson Compton. Before we went on the break, we had a very lengthy discussion on the very first motion debated, presented, and discussed out of the 5 motions scheduled for today. In addition, we have obviously 4 more motions and 1 bill scheduled for the end of today. We have just had the Sergeant of Arms enter the chambers along with the President of the Senate. Please stay tuned to the National Television Network and follow us on our social media platforms.
Honorable Senators, I believe when we arose earlier on, we had just concluded voting on the first motion. So we can continue with our business. I don't see the leader of government business here as yet. I will allow him, I think I just saw him on the stairs. I will allow him a few minutes, about 3 minutes or so.
by Section 63(1)(a) of the Public Finance Management Act, number 14 of 2020, the Act, the Minister of Finance may, by an affirmative resolution of Parliament, borrow from a bank or other financial institution for the capital or current expenditure of government. And whereas it is further resolved by Section 64 of the Act that money borrowed by the government must be paid into and from and form part of the consolidated fund. And whereas the Minister of Finance considers it necessary to borrow from the European Investment Bank the sum of euro 13,500,000 to finance emergency operating expenses in the health sector related to the COVID-19 virus pandemic. And whereas the loan is repayable over a period of 20 years from the date of the first disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a 4-year grace period. And whereas the loan payments shall be made consecutive, equal semi-annual installments. And whereas the loan payment shall commence after the grace period of 4 years. And whereas the interest is payable, A, at a fixed rate of 1.35% to 1.45%, to be determined by the European Investment Bank at the time of disbursement of each tranche. B, at a floating rate of 3 months Euro interbank offered rate plus 110 basis points to 120 basis points per annum. Be it resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow from the European Investment Bank the sum of euro 13,500,000 to finance emergency operating expenses in the health sector related to COVID-19 virus pandemic. Be it further resolved that A, the loan is repayable over a period of 20 years from the date of the first disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a 4-year grace period. B, the loan shall be made in consecutive equal semi-annual installments. C, the loan payments shall commence after the grace period of 4 years expires. D, the interest is payable, 1, at a fixed rate of 1.35 to 1.45%, to be determined by the European Investment Bank at the time of disbursement of each tranche. And 2, at a floating rate of 3 months Euro interbank offered rate plus 110 basis points to 120 basis points per annum. Mr. President, if I may offer some explanation with regard to this motion. This motion really is requesting or is seeking the permission of government to access this financing from the European Investment Bank to cover expenses incurred by the COVID emergency operating expenses. And if we can go back to some of the discussion we had earlier, some of these expenses incurred, unfortunately, in the last term, they were justified because we had a COVID pandemic and things had to be done. But we must know that we are now still paying loans. We are now still paying loans. And that is why earlier on I made reference to what we inherited. We are now still paying for quarantine expenses. All of these monies were borrowed. I did mention, Mr. President, over $300 million. But we are currently still owing for quarantine services. I believe that, these could have been written off already. Mr. President, we are still paying for vaccines that were ordered. And I will get back to that a little later, perhaps at a different stage of this discussion. This government is still saddled with it was originally 7 million, 6 million Some was paid. We still started with over $5 million of outstanding debt with a claim that vaccines were ordered. And we still have not received those vaccines, but we're paying for that. Mr. President, there are other areas in the health sector, in addition to just the quarantine and the vaccines, that this loan intends to help strengthen. We now have heard of all the various variants of COVID, and we do not want to be in a position where we have to be reactive. There's also the looming threat of monkeypox. We've heard it in other parts of the world, and because we're a country that has traffic with tourists, and eventually some of those external issues will find themselves at our doorsteps. We're not waiting for a situation where we are visited by one of these unfortunate, unwanted circumstances to be reactive. We want to be prepared. And so, as we speak, the Ministry of Health is currently putting measures in place to ensure that should we have a case or should we have a situation that presents itself, that we are ready to deal with it. And so, part of this will be put towards measures to mitigate against such eventualities. We are hoping that we will not have to deal with it, but just in case, Mr. President, we want to be prepared. We also, Mr. President, by way of example, want to complement some of what we've already started doing as a government in the health service upon assuming office. We inherited a situation where the health sector was under tremendous stress, and I think members on both sides can agree that the health sector workers, the frontline workers, the emergency services of this country, they've taken a serious battering. Some of them are essentially tired and drawn out and beaten with all of the stresses that they've had to deal with. We've tried to give them some relief, but one of the things that this will do is to help to further strengthen the various aspects of the health sector. And one of them was mentioned by the Minister for Health when he made reference to 8 additional chairs and 1 dialysis unit that we have already purchased to improve the services offered for non-COVID related health issues. So while we do this, Mr. President, we must not keep our eyes focused on one particular issue. We know that COVID is a major one, but if we can work towards improving the overall health services, the overall health of the country, our people will be more able to deal with the other issues that come up. As we have heard in previous discussions, most of the deaths that were caused by the first wave of the Delta variant was as a result of pre-existing conditions, diabetes, high blood pressure, hypertension. We believe that if you can put systems in place to help to manage general health, primary health services, the various healthcare centers, and the hospitals, and we'll get to the hospitals a little later. Mr. President, you can then minimize or cushion some of the impact that can be caused by a disease like COVID. So it's not just responding to COVID as a single phenomenon, but really working on improving the entire health sector so that we are more resilient and more resistant to any pending pandemic or other unforeseen health emergency. So, Mr. President, I use those just by way of context, but I believe that this particular motion seeks to make use of these finances to help us to be a little more proactive and to be ready in the event of an unforeseen health-related situation, as well as strengthening the existing situation that we have in this country. So I hope that we can find reason to give support to that initiative, given the few examples and the context that I have established. Thank you, Mr. President.
Be it resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow from the European Investment Bank the sum of euro 13,500,000 to finance emergency operating expenses in the health sector related to COVID-19 virus pandemic. Be it further resolved that A, the loan is repayable over a period of 20 years from the date of first disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a 4-year grace period. B, the loan payments shall be made in consecutive equal semi-annual installments. C, the loan payments shall commence after the grace period of 4 years expires. D, the interest is payable 1, at a fixed rate of 1.35% to 1.45% to be determined by the European Investment Bank at the time of disbursement for each tranche. 2, at a floating rate of 3 months Euro interbank offered rate plus 110 basis points to 120 basis points per annum. Senator Fady.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Just want to add a few comments to this motion, which seeks to borrow some 13.5 million euros, equivalent Eastern Caribbean 36,585,000, as part of a broader package today by this administration to borrow some $134.5 million. Mr. President, the reason cited by the administration is for the emergency operating in health sector to manage the COVID pandemic. Mr. President, I find it ironic that we come to the House to seek to borrow to beef up the health management to manage the pandemic on the eve of Carnival, when we're going to have thousands of St. Lucians in just a few days that will be going to various activities. In fact, it will be climaxed by the festivities of what we know as the Carnival Monday and Tuesday activities. Before this, Mr. President, I recall that the St. Lucia Medical and Dental Association expressed tremendous concern about the unvaxxed activities leading up to Carnival and the potential that these may cause for the debilitating impact of COVID on the healthcare system of our country. And so, forgive me, Mr. President, that I find this ironic. I also question, Mr. President, whether the move to come to borrow these monies at this time is in part responsible for a notion by the government that perhaps most of our citizens are distracted by Carnival activities, and so therefore to pass through these bills, to borrow loans, could somehow be masked in the distraction of Carnival festivities. I ask a question. I'm not necessarily going to jump to any assumptions because I don't have the evidence, but I think it's a worthwhile question to ask. Mr. President, I shall not cast any conclusive judgment on the decision to have unvaxxed Carnival activities or whether to have a vaccinated Monday and Tuesday. 2 weeks after Carnival, I will cast my judgment as to whether it was in fact a good or bad decision to hold Carnival festivities at a time when the government is admittedly accepting that the COVID pandemic is not over. I think we also need to ask whether there has been a very thorough analysis done. Because I understand the event sector, they've been bleeding. a lot of carnival bands, a lot of musicians, the creative industry sector and the cultural sector, they have come under severe pressures as a result of the pandemic. And so, on the one hand, I feel somewhat happy that there is some economic activity that is going to happen as a result of hosting the carnival. But have we done a thorough analysis to ensure that the impacts of having carnival, that the results, the ramifications, how is that going to affect the broader economic growth, the broader economic momentum that the country badly needs right now? That is an important question to ask the administration, whether that thorough analysis has been done. So, to put it in simple terms, what I'm basically trying to say, Mr. President, is that if we have carnival, what is going to be the result of people reporting sick and cannot go to work? How much the private sector and small and large and medium-sized businesses are going to have to stump up for sick leave? Whether in fact, if there is an outbreak, whether the CDC or the U.S. State Department are going to have the normal travel advisory, and what impact is that going to have on the international travel community, on industries like tourism, for example? Will this slow down other sectors? Will this cause a slowing down of the retail sector, which too have been through very, very, very terrible times because of the onslaught of COVID-19? But those are questions that I'm putting to the administration. You are in government now. I realize that a lot has been said about the fiscal situation, which has dogged successive administrations for decades. And it is now up to this government, rather than blaming any previous administration. You know, you can't change the past. So let's assume that you are correct, that UWP has borrowed and we have been reckless. Let's say I agree with you. Okay, now, I want to ask you, what are you going to do to take St. Lucia out of the hole that you suggest that it's in? What is your debt management strategy? What is your economic strategy? What is your strategy for growth? How are you going to create jobs that people need? How are you going to get back tourism from where it is? The last year, we see that tourism had recovered 47% when compared to where it was in 2019. Now, how are you going to gain back that extra 53% of economic growth from your main sector, which is going to drive jobs, which is going to drive economic activity? What are your plans when we have airlines that are now having difficulty in canceling hundreds of flights because of shortages in staff, meaning pilots and flight attendants and other important employees, to ensure that those flights happen? These are serious questions that the opposition, the government has got to grapple with. And these are the answers. You can't blame UWP for your entire term. For the last year, the first year, I'm frankly not impressed with the way that you've articulated a way out, because even when you were in charge, right, you want to blame the UWP for your decision to implement the passport strategy. Mm-hmm. You want to blame the UWP for your decision to allow the bus fares to go up on the backs of the people of St. Lucia. So it is time that this administration takes responsibility and show leadership to the country, because in your own words, we are in very difficult times. And none of us on this side will deny that the economic circumstances that is brought about by COVID and your favorite line, the Ukraine war, mm-hmm. right? Because today, if it rains in St. Lucia, it's the Ukraine war as well. Yeah. So what I'm saying to you is that this is the hand that you have been dealt. Previous prime ministers have had to deal with the financial crisis of 2008. I've had to deal with natural disasters and hurricanes, but they have stood up and they have led and they have taken St. Lucia forward. So your excuses are not going to cut it. All right? It is time that leadership at every level in the St. Lucia Labour Party administration is truly transformed. Mr. President, the COVID-19 pandemic is one I know very well, and the challenges that we face. Because myself and Senator Stanislaus are part of a cabinet that dealt with the peak of the pandemic. There were no vaccines in the world. No one knew what to do. And so, of course, yes, we had to get quarantine facilities. And I'm proud to say that we had some of the best quarantine facilities in the Caribbean. Because while they were using schools and rundown community centers, and we see pictures coming in from other islands, right, which reflect subpar conditions, we ensured that we did the best for the people of St. Lucia, and we went ahead and we incurred the cost to ensure that the people that had to be quarantined, that they were quarantined safely, responsibly, and in a manageable manner. But instead, what did we see while the country was going through this difficult time? The St. Lucia Labour Party, as it has done always, decided that it was going to have a big grand march. Right? So that what you can do is create a super spreader in this country. And it was one of the worst decisions. And you talk about recklessness. It's one of the worst examples of recklessness that I've seen by any political party. You are the only political party in the Caribbean in the height of the pandemic that you have decided to go and hold a political march because you're only convinced by one thing. You're driven and motivated by politics only, and that is why you're suffering today with the challenges that you're feeling. You have no answers for the problems. You don't know what to do about the price of gas. Let me show you what they're doing in St. Kitts. Right? This is St. Kitts, this is Jamaica. While you are complaining that nothing could be done, I'm going to cite two examples of Caribbean countries that are bringing relief to their citizens. And they are facing the same Ukraine war, they're facing the same high gas prices. But let me quote the Prime Minister.
Mr. President, I rise on a point of order. I know the member was not in his chair when I rebutted. And I believe now he's trying to mislead the House and making a statement that we said, and I was the one who made the statement, and he's trying to make a statement to the contrary, that we can do nothing about the price of gas. I stood here a couple of hours ago and gave concrete examples of what this government is doing, using figures in response to his previous claim. I used cooking gas, 20-pound cylinder, 22-pound cylinder, and I gave figures as well as cushioning the price of gasoline to explain that. He's standing up now and attempting to make it seem that we have said on this side that we can do nothing. The statement is grossly misleading, Mr. President. The member, if he was in his chair, he would have known that he should not have said that. But I give him the benefit since he wasn't there. I'm reminding him that on this side of the House, we have explained what we are doing about the price of gas. We used examples. And I think he should not continue to suggest that we are saying we could do nothing about the price of gas before he proceeds. I thought he should be aware of it.
This is what happens when you absent yourself from your chair or from this House. As the leader of government, Senator Ferdinand said, and as I do recall, and the record would indicate, he did explain the government approach to to handling the gas crisis. And so your statement is somewhat not in sync. It demonstrates that you were not ignorant insofar as what he discussed early on. But I think you've made your point. You may continue.
Mr. President, I shall forgive him. He's a politician of very recent vintage, so he wouldn't know the facts. Mr. President, the Prime Minister is quoted as saying, when asked by the press, the current Minister of Finance, which is the party leader and the government leader, has said that he can do nothing about the price of gas, that the inflation problems that St. Lucia is facing.
Mr. President.
Senator Fede, I have given you great leeway at times, and I tend to do the same with all of the senators. I want you to address your mind to Standing Order 37 and to decipher for yourself whether, in fact, the point that you are attempting to make or the point that you have made is relevant to the motion before us. The motion before us is to authorize the Minister of Finance to borrow from the European Investment Bank some $13,500,000 euros to finance emergency operating expenses in the health sector related to COVID-19 virus pandemic. Could you explain to me what does that have to do with the price of gas and all of that? It has nothing to do with that. So I would advise you to stay focused and speak to the motion that's before this House.
Very well, Mr. President. So, as I was saying before, the COVID-19 pandemic, we intimately understand the economic challenges, the complexities. And so, Mr. President, if I had to make a link between what does the COVID-19 pandemic have with the price of gas, you would have remembered that all day that the members on this side, they have blamed two things. One is the Ukraine war and the other the COVID pandemic that have brought about supply chain shocks. And as a result, it's affecting all commodities, whether it is gas, whether it is commodities in the supermarket. So there is a very strong nucleus, Mr. President, if you would just allow me to draw the link that exists between the Ukraine war. So, but I am guided by you, Mr. President, and I shall move on. So, what we intimately understand is the economic ravages that could come about because of COVID-19. And for that reason, when we were dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic and the monies that they said that we borrowed, right? I will tell you where the money went. I'll tell you where the money went. The money, Mr. President, went into beefing up and shoring up the healthcare sector. This loan, which they have come to borrow, is a UWP idea. We negotiated this loan, okay? And they have basically come and to follow suit with the same strategy. They've had a choice to decide that they are going to repurpose the loan or not go ahead with the loan because they are in charge now of the government. So basically, we did give the people income support. We tapped into the NIC, but there were 6,000 individuals that were unrecorded or unregistered employees who got monies from our COVID response funds, which we draw down from the international donor community. And so we didn't just promise income support, we delivered to 11,000 via the NIC program, as well as another 6,000 people who benefited outside of the NIC contributions. And those monies were borrowed from the IMF Rapid Response Facility, which was made available to all Caribbean countries. Mr. President, but we did more than that. The healthcare system was worse than it was now, and gradually governments are making improvements. So one of the things that we had to do was to establish a respiratory facility, establish Victoria Hospital as a respiratory hospital to get that going. We established the quarantine facilities, and yes, if this administration is dealing with the expenses 1 year later, just imagine if you weren't paying that now, the crisis, the disaster, the humanitarian crisis that we would have had to deal with. And so I want to thank the hotel community for being such great partners in understanding that there were cash flow challenges, as they are now, right? You are in a better position now. At least you've got the tourism sector 50% back. And you're in a better position now to pay your bills than we could have been. And so to say that we're only now paying the tax, the expenses of quarantine facilities is a bit disingenuous. We had to beef up the testing facility at Ezra Long and the forensic lab. You would recall that after Christmas of 2020, there was a massive outbreak that was caused on the island. And to deal with that overwhelmed our capacity to be able to test. And we beefed it up in quick time. We got it organized while it was difficult for supplies to move across the world and the challenges that we were facing then. We got it done to ensure that we could respond and manage the island's worst health crisis in history. There was the beefing up of the health sector, human resource capacity, by the mobilization of the Cuban Medical Brigade, which helped our doctors and nurses and other health professionals to ensure that they are in a good position and in the best position to fight the pandemic. Mr. President, all of this was done. On the social relief side, we helped with electricity bills of thousands of St. Lucian families because it was very difficult. 15,000 people lost their jobs, and we responded, Mr. President, by doing that. We expand the list of vulnerable persons because COVID brought about more vulnerability, and our government responded to it. So when they asked the question about where the money went to, this is where it went. We supported the local farmers and our fishermen by buying their produce to take foods to vulnerable groups of persons. I remember one night at Nemo, right? We had hundreds of volunteers coming out, and we were working there overnight to deliver some 15,000 care packages to 15,000 families in the country. That's where the money went to, right? When you talk about where the money went to, we got 24 ventilators, which was recommended by the WHO for a population our size. And whilst you saw that developed countries that were more wealthy than St. Lucia, that you would have thought would have been able to overcome shortages. I remember Governor Cuomo in New York taking the federal government to task about the state of New York not having sufficient ventilators, and as a result it undermined the ability of that country to be able to manage the pandemic. We were much better off in St. Lucia, where we had adequate ventilators for the sick population during the time when we were managing the crisis. And so, Mr. President, yes, we support this bill. Yes, we support this motion, because this is a motion that we negotiated. But what we don't support is the duplicity. We don't support the politics. We don't support the misleading of the population. We don't support, Mr. President, the lack of detail that exists here and the lack of clear understanding of senators on the government side as to what is required now. And we find it most ironic. And our final judgment on whether the decision to have unvaccinated events for carnival season, whether that decision is one that will not come back to haunt us as a country. Mr. President, with that, I thank you.
Senator Reynolds.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I wish to stand to give my support to this motion for the borrowing of 13,500,000 euros for the health sector in this country. And Mr. President, I think information has been put forward in terms of what the monies will be used for. Emergency operating expenses in the health sector related to COVID-19, as it pertains to vaccines, as it pertains to medium to long-term post-COVID health instruments. Mr. President, I am happy to hear that the leader of the opposition business here supports the motion for borrowing. However, it's always seemed to come across that we are playing politics and we are leaving people in the dark. Mr. President, I think the Minister for Health explained in the lower house, and I think also the leader of government business gave explanations as to what is being purchased, what is on the respiratory units, the chairs for the dialysis unit, to strengthen intensive care unit, the capacity for patients who have respiratory diseases, the lab capacity for testing. Information is being given, the update of the IT and other equipment and software, stockpiling of medical equipment and medicines, providing for vaccine support and logistics. Mr. President, we recall Rock Hard Cement getting $8 million for vaccines, where we had a COVAX facility providing vaccines through the WHO and PAHO. And this former government, this former administration gave out $8 million. We've only gotten back $2 million, and our monies are out there. And when we intend to borrow to deal with vaccine situation and other logistics, we are being told we're playing politics. We are giving information. We want to strengthen transport and surveillance. When we came into government, Mr. President, I'm sure you recall, the Minister for Health stood up in the lower house and gave a range of updates in terms of what was done at the facility. And I may add, Mr. President, COVID even saved us our OKU hospital, which was complete, ready to be transitioned into, but being held back. And thank God, COVID forced us to rush into OKU. Otherwise, at the mercy of Health City Cayman, we would have been today. But we had no choice but to get out of Victoria Hospital and go into OKEU and give the people of St. Lucia what was negotiated in the EU for them, which is a first-class health facility in the OKEU. And so even when the Victoria Hospital was transformed into the respiratory clinic, there is much to be done. And I agree the former administration had to spend money to improve the services, but they did a whole lot of painting on the outside. But we saw the patients themselves posting videos of what was happening, the terror that they experienced at the hospital. And so this government had to find money to improve the services, to deal with even things like Wi-Fi, so that the patients could speak to their loved ones and the doctors. And after borrowing hundreds of millions of dollars for health, for COVID, then we saw them doing the telephone fundraiser so that they could buy protective equipment for frontline workers. What is that? Borrowing millions of dollars for COVID, and then frontline workers had to be doing a telephone, calling people to give money so that they could buy protective equipment for frontline workers. So when we are about playing politics, I like, Mr. President, I like us to just be educated. I like us just to be open. I like us to deal with the business of this country and tell the people what is. Just like they did previously, if you have 1-2 questions, be specific. Ask your 1-2 questions. The leader of government business, myself or any other senator, could rise and give guidance. But to play and to go back and forth in this noise and all always like this is a political game. I repeat, Mr. President, this is not a political game. These are trying times for the people of this country. And so, the government has no choice. Even if they wanted to play politics, they have no choice but to do what is absolutely necessary to strengthen the healthcare system. As the leader of government business indicated, many of our people who passed, and may they rest in peace, and their families continue to be strengthened because they have lost loved ones. A lot of them had underlying conditions. Many others would not take the vaccine because they are too scared to do so. But we look at the situation, underlying conditions, and so we must not throw our hands in the air and say we can't do anything. We must do what is absolutely necessary to strengthen the healthcare system, the primary healthcare system in the health centers, to do what is absolutely necessary so people can have health and wellness. They can do the early testing. They can go to the doctors in the health centers in the communities and get their medication. This is why we're doing what we're doing. And so, yes, we want to strengthen all the logistics. We want to strengthen the systems in our health sector to respond, and as we continue to get out of COVID, to respond to the COVID situation. We want to address the gaps in the public healthcare system. We want to do all what is necessary to continue to save lives. And so, Mr. President, I again reiterate my support for this motion of borrowing on behalf of the people of St. Lucia in strengthening our healthcare system. I thank you.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the two senators who contributed to the debate. Just by way of a brief response to some of the issues that were raised by the leader of government business, I noted that he was careful in ensuring that when the figures were presented in terms of the 13.5 million euro, that he ensured that the figures were also quoted in EC dollars. Looks like opposition has done him well. In government, everything was US dollars. And, you know, it's nice to hear that we pay attention to the EC equivalent. So I commend the opposition for learning something. I may want to take back some of what I said earlier that they haven't learned. I think they're starting to learn. Also, Mr. President, I think the leader of government business did allude to the issue of carnival.
Correction.
Of opposition business.
Thank you very much.
Did allude to the issue of carnival. I suspect that throughout the course of his deliberations on this motion, which is related to health system strengthening and COVID response, the bulk of his contribution seemed to have focused on carnival. Now, I know he was a former tourism minister, so I empathize, but I want to remind him that he should know, of all persons in this chamber, the impact, the economic impact that the tourism sector has on this country right now, and the valuable economic benefits of the hundreds and thousands of persons who take the opportunity to travel to this country because of Carnival. So I want to remind the House that this motion is not about Carnival, but it's about health. Mr. President, the leader of opposition business also spoke about the issue confronting the markets, and now that there are some concerns about flights in some countries, our source markets, I think this is true, and some of these external factors we have considered. So as a proactive government, the Tourism Ministry has embarked upon some serious analysis and aggressive marketing to ensure that we explore other source markets, because we know that our major source markets have been the US and UK. And right now we have serious issues in the regional markets, and that is mainly because of the Liat issue. And so we have been proactive to provide him with some response. that now that we are trying to strengthen our healthcare resilience and our healthcare system, that we ensure that whatever activities are happening out there, we have alternatives to what we currently have. Finally, Mr. President, the issue of bills being paid and the government, I think the leader of opposition business stressed on the investment that the government then made on quarantine facilities to make persons comfortable and compared the level of comfort. I have no issues with that. If the government felt that we should invest in quarantine at the time, I think that was okay. My issue is, these quarantine facilities were being used with a cost. The government borrowed in excess of $300 million in the name of COVID. Why is it that today, 2022, July, this government is still saddled with quarantine debt? The IMF gave you the money for COVID-related expenses. Quarantine facilities were part of your COVID-related expenses. You procured the services, or you secured the services of these quarantine facilities to house persons during that time. Why is it that after borrowing so much money, that we now have to be paying for quarantine? It was not a loan you were giving. It's an expense that was there. That should have been paid. This government should not have been paying for quarantine services today. So, Mr. President, I don't understand why the leader of opposition business, who was in government, who approved or supported his then prime minister in borrowing all of this money that we now have to pay back for that particular purpose, is now sitting over there and chastising us who are trying to pay the bills they incurred, albeit that they were for the country, and we're not complaining that they should have had quarantine. But you had money to pay for it. Pay your debts. We are still paying for vaccines. Pay your debts. You borrowed the money for that purpose. I'll say it in Creole. Gouvernement qui était là, là nous teni problème COVID, prêté plus passer $300 million en moins qui yon l'année pour yo di yo ka payer pour dette COVID, pour affaire COVID. Yo teni place pour mettre moun qui teni COVID, yo ka kouye sa quarantine. Juste toujours, yo te prêté 300 millions, juste toujours, gouvernement nous à présent qu'a payé dette quarantine. Qui ça ou fait puis l'argent ou prêté pour COVID? And so, Mr. President, I think it is grossly unfair for anyone on this side of the House to ask this government questions about borrowing to now go and pay for the same debts that they incurred and they got money to pay. So now we have to pay the debts that they had borrowed, the money that they borrowed, which is already on our debt stock. And then we have to now find additional money to pay for the same things that they borrowed to pay. It doesn't make sense. That means we're borrowing twice for the same reason. And I think, Mr. President, he knows full well what was done with those monies. I don't want to get into that today or right now. But as we go on in the term of this government, a lot of these things will come to the fore and they will be dealt with at the appropriate time. So, Mr. President, in closing, I want to thank our members who contributed, and I want us to remind and assure this Honorable Senate that every cent of this money will be put towards exactly what it says, the strengthening of our health sector and the efforts towards dealing with the COVID-induced situation that we have. I thank you, Mr. President.
Be it resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow from the European Investment Bank the sum of euro 13,500,000 to finance emergency operating expenses in the health sector related to COVID-19 virus pandemic. Be it further resolved that A, the loan is repayable over a period of 20 years from the date of first disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a 4-year grace period. B, the loan payments shall be made in consecutive equal semi-annual installments. C, the loan payments shall commence after the grace period of 4 years expire. D, the interest is payable, 1, at a fixed rate of 1.35% to 1.45% to be determined by the European Investment Bank at the time of disbursement for each tranche. And 2, at a floating rate of 3 months, Euro interbank offered rate plus 110 basis points to 120 basis points per annum. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas it is provided by Section 63(1) of the Public Finance Management Act, number 14 of 2020, the Act, that the Minister of Finance may, by an affirmative resolution of Parliament, borrow from a bank or other financial institution for the capital or current expenditure of government. And whereas it is further provided by Section 64 of the Act that money borrowed by the government must be paid into and form part of the consolidated fund. And whereas the Minister of Finance considers it necessary to borrow the amount of US $8 million from the International Development Association for the Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States Data for Decision-Making Project. And whereas the service charge is the greater of A, the sum of 3/4 of 1% per annum, plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and B, 3/4 of 1% per annum on the withdrawn credit balance. And whereas the maximum commitment charge rate is 1/2 of 1% per annum on the unwithdrawn finance balance, and whereas the loan is repayable in 40 years commencing from the date of disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a grace period of 10 years. And whereas the principal amount of the loan is repayable on each 15th day of March and 15th day of September each year, commensurate with the following terms. A, 1% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of September 2032 and including the 2032 and including the 15th day of March 2042. B, 2% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of September 2042 and including the 15th day of March 2062. Be it resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of US $8 million from the International Development Association to finance the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States Data for Decision-Making Project. Be it further resolved that A, the service charge is the greater of 1, the sum of 3/4 of 1% per annum, plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and 2, 3/4 of 1% per annum on the withdrawn credit balance. B, the maximum commitment charge is 1/2 of 1% per annum on an unwithdrawn financial balance. C, the loan is repayable in 40 years commencing from the date of disbursement of the loan, including a grace period of 10 years. D, the principal amount of the loan is repayable on each 15th day of March and 15th day of September each year, commensurate with the following terms. 1, 1% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of September 2032 and including the 15th day of March 2042. 2, 2% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of September 2042 and including the 15th day of March 2062. Mr. President, if I may just offer some explanation with regard to this particular motion. This motion, as it is called, the OECS Data for Decision-Making initiative, if I can call it, really is something that not only St. Lucia but other Caribbean countries like Grenada St. Vincent and the Grenadines, have taken advantage of or are accessing. St. Lucia accessing 8 million and the other countries different amounts. This is a general move by these countries, and rightfully so, to improve our ability to make decisions that are driven by data. And I think I must credit all the OECS countries that have decided to go in that direction. It is a very basic principle in any profession or any practice that decisions made based on data, authentic data that is gathered, is usually more properly guided, and it is best practice. And in this country, I have witnessed in my few years on this earth several decisions that have been made, and I don't want to chastise any particular government at this point, by both governments, private sector, and others, that were not properly researched, that were not based on sound, authentic data, that were not informed by empirical evidence, that have cost the country and cost others a lot of pain. It is not good practice to just make decisions based on feeling or based on a hunch or some kind of arbitrary, feel. It is important that research and data guides what we do. And I think it's a move in the right direction. I think it's forward thinking. I think it's progressive. And I commend the government of St. Lucia, and as well as the other governments of the OECS who have decided to take advantage of this opportunity. I just want to give 3 examples of what the breakdown of this loan is intended to do. Mr. President, one of them, a sum of 3.5 million US, is going to be committed for statistical modernization and capacity building. The census operation comes to mind. As we know, Mr. President, every 10 years we have a national census. I think it's going on right now. And basically what a census does is gather information on 2 main things: living conditions and the socioeconomic situation of households. But I think in that 10-year gap, so much can happen in a country. And I think if we have to rely on only that single initiative to guide our policy making and our decision making as a government, I think we'd be falling short. Because let's just compare how things have changed between, say, the decade 2010 to 2020. I mean, who would have thought that in 2019 we would have had to be locked down, we would have had to make all these changes in our lives, and we cannot really plan for those. If we gather data a lot more regularly, a lot more systematically in all of the sectors in this country, agriculture, for food production, anticipate trends in the global sector, in education, in sustainable development, which is a big issue now, in the banking and financing, in science and technology, I think we are better placed to make informed decisions. That is what data-based decision-making does. You have a basis, a scientific basis upon which to make decisions. And I really applaud this initiative. Another one, Mr. President, another area that some of this money is going to, is a total of 3.7 million for data collection and analysis. Data collection is just one aspect of the use of data. And anyone here who has done formal research understands that. I think all of us here have done that. Most of us have had tertiary level education, and we understand that in the process, you don't just gather the data. You can gather it and put it on a shelf and it has no meaning, no use. You can even gather it and interpret it badly or analyze it poorly, and then you make the wrong decision. So if you have the expert knowledge, the resources to first gather data and then to analyze it properly, then you are in a position to make decisions that are relevant. Mr. President, finally, by way of example, a sum of 800,000 US is being put towards project implementation. And again, that is critical, because once you've been able to establish what the data is picking up, you've been able to analyze it properly and decide what you do, your priorities, and each of your decisions, then one of the serious challenges becomes implementation. And I know many governments of the past who have had good policies, very good policies, both St. Lucia and others, and United Workers' Party governments in the past, I can't really speak of the last one, but previous to that, and the Lucia Labour Party governments and other regional governments, they had good stated intentions. They had outlined certain policies, very well articulated, but they did not implement. They failed to implement because there was no serious implementation plan in place to ensure that these policies were translated into action that was meaningful and contributed to the country's development. And so it is important that as part of the effort, we don't only gather data and analyze data and put the mechanisms in place for it, but we also prepare for proper implementation of what the data is telling us to do. So I really believe that this is a very comprehensive approach to it, and I'm very happy that these various aspects were laid out. Finally, Mr. President, I want to just mention that it is important at this time, 2022, when we have a real fast-paced, technologically advanced world, that we make use of timely access to data. Timely access to the information you want is critical. There are things we try to find out, but by the time we go find it out, it's way too late. It's not relevant anymore. And if we had that information before, we would have been better placed to make a decision. And a good example of that is, Mr. President, I will not be distracted. But just to be relevant, had some analysis been done about the relevance of ebooks in 2020 or 2018, whenever it was introduced, we would not have had a stack of that packed up in the office somewhere near the Parliamentary Secretary for Education now, that we have nothing to do with. That we are now paying, we have to pay licenses for, we have to pay the cost of, and the students they're not using it. And now we have to go back to give them the laptops. I don't think that there was proper data analysis and proper collection of information to guide that behavior. And so the implementation was bad. And so the timely collection of data is critical. When you get the information, can decide whether you are going to make the right decision or the wrong decision. So I really applaud the initiative that and the intention of this motion, and I really hope that it is going to put us in a better position to be better informed on the decisions that we make on behalf of the citizens of this country. Thank you, Mr. President.
Be it resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of US $8 million from the International Development Association to finance the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States Data for Decision-Making project. Be it further resolved that A, the service charge is the greater of 1, the sum of 3/4 of 1% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and 2, 3/4 of 1% per annum on the withdrawn credit balance. B, the maximum commitment charge is 1/2 of 1% per annum on the unwithdrawn financing balance. C, the loan is repayable in 40 years, commencing from the date of disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a grace period of 10 years. The principal amount of the loan is repayable on each 15th day of March and 15th day of September each year, commensurate with the following terms. 1% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of September 2032 and including the 15th day of March 2042. 2% of the loan amounting 2% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of September 2042 to and including the 15th day of March 2062. I now put the question. As many as are that opinion, say aye. Will you? No, I could reverse. I'm not going to put the question, if it is. Well, the point is, when I looked, There were no lights on. I didn't see it. But your lights were not on. When I looked, I took my time and looked around the room. There were no lights on. No, but you missed the boat. Senator, you don't need to remind me of what my job is. You need to pay attention. That is what you need to do. Pay attention. If you protect the minority, then do what you have to do to help protect their interests. Pay attention. I will allow you to respond. I will allow you to respond. Just because I have the minority's interest at heart. Not because you are procedurally correct. You're incorrect. But I'll use my discretion and allow you to. You may go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I do apologize for the delay in our microphone coming on. No harm was meant to you, Mr. President, nor any disrespect at all was meant. So I do offer to you my sincerest apology and want to let you know that the opposition is committed to working with your chair to enforce the powers bestowed on it by our Constitution.
Please commence.
I thank you very much, Mr. President, for your kind gesture. Mr. President, the motion before us this afternoon is a very important one that seeks to improve the statistics across the OECS. And some $8 million is the price tag for such a project. I want to start out by saying that I support the project. We agree that statistics generally as a development tool needs to be developed across the spectrum of our development landscape. Mr. President, for example, the tourism statistics, for example, needs to be improved. We are stuck in this era of judging the success of the industry by arrival numbers only. And we have what is called an exit survey done by every visitor, asking them how much they spend to determine what the revenue spent is. And so, Mr. President, if we had that, for example, if we had a better mechanism to ensure that the true economic contribution that tourism as a lead sector would make towards the GDP, that would be helpful in our development, and it allows us as a country to make more informed decisions. Stats on salaries, for example, the Social Economic Review talks about the whole issue of the unemployment rate and the size of the workforce, and it gives you very good stats. But I think one of the most important thing that's missing is what is the mean, the median, and the mode salary in our country, so that as policymakers, we would know whether our policies are really affecting the people. A lot of us come to the House and we make pronouncements. This government, for example, most recently, saying that, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this. But to be able to measure what that is in real value, the jobs that we create, the salaries that those jobs create, whether it is good enough for an average St. Lucian family to be able to be in the middle class, for example, and have a lifestyle that would allow it to be in the middle class. Underemployment is a major issue in this country. But we can only offer commentary that is speculative, because we can't go to any of our indicators or statistics to indicate whether underemployment, what the rate is, and so on. But that, Mr. President, must be an economic reality that we must address. You know, what comes to mind, I agree with the leader of government business when he said that successive administrations have made mistakes because they've either analyzed the data wrongly, they've either failed to do the study, to be informed as to what the data is really saying. And one of the stark examples of this, Mr. President, is the whole universal education project that we implemented in St. Lucia, where the sufficient work wasn't done to determine that the birth rate in St. Lucia was declining, and as a result, we had to take note of a declining birth rate and allow that to inform us by the amount of secondary schools that we build. Today, what we're seeing is very low populations at every level: primary schools, secondary schools, infant schools. In fact, I know that policymakers have been working to try to merge those schools so that we could utilize the space in these institutions a lot more effectively. Being a small country, we can't afford to make those investments that are lavish, and those investments that would have an impact on the cash flow of the country that would worsen the fiscal situation. I mean, the question of building a school is a very expensive endeavor, one which a government will take many, many years, a country will take to pay back that debt. And so that is one example that comes to mind. I agree with the member when he suggested that successive administrations haven't followed that well. Another one that I found out recently was the whole business of, in some areas where you have comprehensive schools, and we need to now examine, like, where there's a mechanic shop that is only assigned to a secondary school, whether that mechanic shop is properly utilized by enough children in those what we call comprehensive schools, and whether the majority of the school population, for example, is not slanted towards the more academic subjects. And has it now been a fact as a result of the data that what we should in fact do is to establish specialized vocational institutions where perhaps we can get a better return for our investment, where you have more vocational slanted students that would go and populate the school in a better way. An example of that as well, Mr. President, could be found in the Social Economic Review when we talk about debt, for example. I mean, there's tons and tons of information here on page 126 of the Social Economic Review, and it shows you a steady climb of the debt of the country, regardless of which administration is in power. And so I would want to advise the government side to acquaint themselves with page 126 and look at the official debt, the central debt, the outstanding debt. And the table is quite clear, and it has it in millions to show. And if you go back in years of the Social Economic Review, it will tell you where we have seen the peaks and where we have seen the troughs. And I can guarantee you that after reading thoroughly the Social Economic Review and analyzing the debt, that the senators and the government side would never come back to this House and say that they are paying for our debt, because usually development loans are for a long time. So for example, if I look at this one, how long is this going to take? 20 years to repay. You're not going to be in power for 20 years. Another government is going to have to come and repay that debt. You know, you're taking loans here which have gone on for longer periods. So, I mean, stop misleading the
Honorable Senator.
Yes?
I have given you the leeway, and I've used my discretion in allowing you.
Yeah.
I would advise you to speak to the motion at hand. The motion deals with the government borrowing from the International Development Association to finance the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States data for decision-making process. I don't see the relevance in what you just said your last few comments. I don't see the relevance.
Okay, very well, Mr. President. I'll be guided by you. I disagree, but I am moving on. So therefore, the social economic review as a statistical tool is very instructive, and it happens to have figures about the debt. It happens to have figures about everything: agricultural production, tourism production, manufacturing production. And so it is from the whole broad principle of statistics that we need effective data to make informed decisions about the development of our country. So, Mr. President, I would like to posit that this is an important bill. It does beg the question to me that why would this project, though, be important at this time? Because I'll tell you why I'm asking this question, especially in view of questions we've had, and particularly when I was in government, the Labour Party, then in opposition, would say, when you bring projects like these that are more long-term in the development, they would say, why don't you take the money and give it to the people in terms of income support? Now, I wouldn't go down that road, because I know that the International Development Association, they have their mandate. So on this specific motion, they're giving monies for the development of our statistics, right? And this motion speaks rather clearly to that. And for the development of our statistics, if the money is, if their mandate at a given time of their organization's history is in a particular place, then it will be what the mandates are. Even now, one of the things, Mr. President, the new phenomenon is policy-tied loans. So when you're borrowing from these organizations, this government is finding out now that they are watertight in terms of what they loan you to borrow. So the development world has a very narrow scope, and sometimes some of the things we would like to do with monies from the World Bank and from the IMF, they simply aren't available, and that is the fact. So I thank you, Mr. President, for your indulgence, and want to say to you that the opposition remains very committed to honoring your chair and respecting your authority as the chairman of this House. Thank you.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. President. For once, I think I'll have no reason to be more than a minute or two. First, let me thank the Leader of Opposition Business for his contribution. I think I sense that there is support for the bill, for the motion, which is encouraging and wise. I think an issue that was raised in his contribution was the issue of not having collected data to guide the introduction of the Universal Secondary Education Program. I will not dispute that, because the hindsight has exposed some of the weaknesses of that program. But I'll tell him that one of the things that is being done now, and that the Prime Minister in his allocation of portfolios under education, there is a department known as vocational studies, and this signals a focus. So the schools that were built, and we may find correctly so that the population rate has dropped, and the statistics are showing that. But what is more important is to deal with the situation as we go forward. It is important now that we repurpose these schools. A lot of these schools that are not up to maximum capacity, after 3 o'clock, after 4, there's need to repurpose. And repurpose in what ways? There's a lot of after-school programs, technical and vocational programs that resemble what we had as NELU and NELP, where you give persons a second chance and concentrate on the technical areas. Good evidence of that is what we just did on Monday of this week. On Monday of this week, this government was in cul-de-sac at around 9:30 a.m., and we had a sword-turning ceremony to build the care facility. And if you're going to build any educational institution now, or even renovate or expand you must be guided by the stats that tell you that the future of our education is about having the competencies that are relevant to deal with the reality of the day. And technical education is one of them. That is why we're not going to build a grammar school, but we are putting a care institution in place. So I welcome that initiative, and I look forward to our students getting a second chance through that institution. And finally, Mr. President, the greater investment in what we're borrowing here today. I think the leader of opposition business cited several times the social and economic review. Suspect his leader had real difficulty reading from it in the last sitting. But I think I want to just mention that it's not the only point of reference that we should use in dealing with or discussing data. I think we should also look at what component 4 of the motion says, and I'll just read it for the benefit of the Senate. And I'll end with that. It says this 0.8 million, that's about 800,000, will be put towards project implementation. And it says, I quote, this component will support the project implementation unit, PIU, in St. Lucia, covering the hiring of PIU staff, recruitment of consultants on a needs basis, not just anyhow, on a needs basis, audits, equipment, including laptops for hiring PIU staff and operating costs. Here is an example of how you target your spending based on what you need. It's not just doing things because you just feel like you do it. You have recognized what you would need, and you're borrowing the money to spend on the targeted, necessary intervention. So I thank him again, and I thank you, Mr. President, for your indulgence, and hope that as we move forward with the implementation of these programs, that they will benefit us all. Thank you, Mr. President.
Be it resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of US $8 million from the International Development Association to finance the organization of Eastern Caribbean States Data for Decision-Making Project. Be it further resolved that the service charge of the greater amount of the sum of 3/4 of 1% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and 2, 3/4 of 1% per annum on the withdrawn credit balance. B, the maximum commitment charge is 1/2 of 1% per annum on withdrawn financing balance. C, the loan is repayable in 40 years, commencing from the date of disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a grace period of 10 years. D, the principal amount of the loan is repayable on each 15th day of March and 15th day of September each year, commensurate with the following terms. 1% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of September 2032 and including the 15th day of March 2042. 2% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of September 2042 and including the 15th day of March 2062. I now put the question. As many as are that opinions, say aye. As many as are the contrary opinions, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I beg to move for the, excuse my voice. I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas it is provided by Section 63(1) of the Public Finance Management Act number 14 of 2020, the Act, that the Minister of Finance may, by an affirmative resolution of Parliament, borrow from a bank or other financial institution for the capital or current expenditure of government. And whereas it is further provided by Section 64 of the Act that money borrowed by the government must be paid into and form part of the consolidated fund. And whereas the Minister of Finance considers it necessary to borrow an amount of $18 million US from the International Development Association for the implementation of the unleashing of the blue economy of the Caribbean project. And whereas the service charge is a greater of A, the sum of 0.75% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and B, 0.75% per annum on the withdrawn credit balance. And whereas the maximum commitment charge is 0.5% per annum on the withdrawn financing balance. And whereas the loan is repayable in 40 years, commencing from the date of disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a grace period of 10 years. And whereas the principal amount of the loan is repayable on each 15th day of May and 15th day of November each year, commensurate with the following terms. A, 1% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of May 2032 and to and including the 15th day of November 2041. B, 2% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of May 2042 and to and including the 15th day of November 2061. Be it resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of US $18 million for the International Development from the International Development Association for the implementation of unleashing of the blue economy of the Caribbean project. Be it further resolved that A, the service charge is the greater of 1, the sum of 0.75% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and 2, 0.75% per annum on the withdrawn credit balance. B, the maximum commitment charge is 0.5% per annum on the unwithdrawn financing balance. C, the loan is repayable in 40 years commencing from the date of disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a grace period of 10 years. D, the principal amount of the loan is repayable on each 15th day of May and 15th day of November each year, commensurate with the following terms. 1% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of May 2032 to and including the 15th day of November 2041. And 2% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of May 2042 to and including the 15th day of November 2061. And Mr. President, I just wish to provide, as I have done on several occasions today, for each of these motions. For this motion, I just wanted to provide just a little bit of additional information that I think would be relevant in this chamber. As we have heard from the resolution, this loan is really a loan that is really relevant to the times. It really is something that is required right now. And if you go into any conversation in the global environment about any issue, whether it is economic development, agriculture, education, tourism, one of the key terms that you hear is sustainable development, climate change, resilience. You hear that. And it means that everything now has a very important focus on that concept. So we are aware of the realities of climate change. We heard our Prime Minister's address, I think it was in Suriname, when he really stood up to some of the bigger fish and reminded them that we as small territories in the Caribbean are responsible for less than 2% or less than 0.5% of the total global emissions, yet we feel the brunt of the consequences of their actions with all these natural disasters and global warming side effects, if you like. And so, as a small state, a developing state, we need to ensure that we pay sufficient attention to matters relating to preserving, conserving, and maximizing the use of our, what we call our blue economy. Mr. President, 3 to 9% of our GDP annually is being lost. And that is not only St. Lucia. Countries in the region losing significant percentages of their GDP. And it's increasing almost every year because of factors related to climate change. Mr. President, we also have to be aware that even if we talk about COVID as a major threat and health, one of the things that we have to realize as St. Lucians, for example, is that we can go to bed tonight, we can leave this chamber tonight, and tomorrow morning we get up, and because of maybe 4 or 5 hours of a hurricane action or some natural disaster, our entire GDP can be wiped off in a matter of 4 hours. A single hurricane, and we've seen it in Dominica, we've seen it in other countries. Within 4 hours or less, you can get up one day and your entire GDP is wiped off. So, as a country, we have to be aware of this, and we have to be able to find ways to make better use of the blue economy. That requires building resilience. That also requires adaptation. And this loan is not, the implementation of the benefits of this loan will not be a short-term, one-shot issue. It's going to be done over a 6-year period. So that tells you that there is a certain level of sustainability and succession that will take place as the programs go on. Mr. President, this resolution is also consistent with one of the Sustainable Development Goals. As stated by the Minister for Education, it's Sustainable Development Goal number 14, which speaks to the tapping into the sustainable use of the marine environment, the ocean, as a resource for economic development. We are proud to say that as St. Lucians, we are surrounded by water. Completely surrounded by water as a beautiful country, as a beautiful island. That's how we get the definition of an island. But are we making proper use or sustainable use of that resource? Are we doing so? And I think we can all say that to date, we could have done a lot better. And so it is important that we tap into that as a resource and make it work for us, but not just to exploit and pollute and damage it, but in a sustainable way, protect the environment while we tap into that resource. Mr. President, this is also a very good alternative to traditional practices in economic activity. For too long, we have relied solely on tourism, a little agriculture, maybe manufacturing, and some traditional methods that have become a greater challenge now, because some of these resources aren't totally ours to control. There is now a situation with access to services, the supply chain, food. This morning we saw ashes from the volcano, reminding us of sugar. We have issues with being able to supply ourselves with food. So, Mr. President, it is important that as a country, we do not rely on the traditional economic activities to generate employment and to sustain ourselves. We have to look elsewhere. Soufrière is a very good example of a part of this country where there's tremendous potential, and I'm sure the former representative for Soufrière will agree. Tremendous potential with the marine environment, and we need to tap into that. I hope the Soufrière Marine Management Authority is listening, and that they can, work with us to do that. Mr. President, I think it's also important to note that every sector, like I said earlier, has made it very clear that for us to be sustainable, for us to be creative, we must make better use of the blue economy. There are countries around the world that do not have access to 238 square miles surrounded by water, completely surrounded by water. Coral reefs and all those other, I mean, we haven't found oil yet, but mangroves and there's so many beautiful assets that we actually have available to us in this part of the world that I think we are well placed to take advantage of this opportunity. The two key words in this is that it is sustainable, it is climate friendly, and I think when you can find something within your immediate environment that is climate friendly and sustainable as a means of generating economic activity, you should take advantage of it because you're well placed. So I look forward to the implementation of this and look for the benefits for every single community, even the inland communities of this country. Let it not be thought that it's only for the coastal communities. The Mabuya Valley, very so, communities inland, there's opportunity, Babano, there's opportunity for all of them to benefit from initiatives like this. So I look forward to that. One more thing I wanted to add, Mr. President. I want to urge our agencies that in doing so, we pay attention to the conservation factors and the preservation factors and deal with matters of pollution, littering, and so on. Because sometimes in our efforts to tap into the blue economy and the ocean, we tend to be a little reckless and forget that we'll need it tomorrow. So I look forward to that, and I look forward also to the support of our colleagues for this motion. Thank you, Mr. President.
Be it resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of US $18 million from the International Development Association for the implementation of the Unleashing of the Blue Economy of the Caribbean project. Be it further resolved that A, the service charge is the greater of 1, the sum of 3/4 of 1% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge, and 2, 3/4 of 1% per annum on the withdrawn credit balance. B, the maximum commitment charge is 1/2 of 1% per annum on the unwithdrawn financing balance. C, the loan is repayable in 40 years commencing from the date of disbursement of the loan inclusive of a grace period of 10 years. D, the principal amount of the loan is repayable on each 15th day of May and 15th day of November each year, commensurate with the following terms. 1% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of May 2042 and including the 15th day of November 2041. And 2% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of May 2042 and including the 15th day of November 2061. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Excuse me? Right. No, because, again, lights. Don't look at me. Put your lights on. No, you don't. I'm not talking to you. Honourable members, the standing orders makes provision. Members are recognized by an indication of, by way of the light from your microphones. Do not look to communicate with me directly. I look for the lights, the little red light. And if there aren't any red lights, then I move on. Leader of Government Business.
Thank you for acknowledging my red light, Mr. President. Mr. President, I beg to move the following motion, standing in my name. Whereas it is provided by Section 54(1) of the Public Finance Management Act number 14 of 2020, that the Minister for Finance may, by affirmative resolution of Parliament, write off losses of public monies, public assets, or other movable property belonging to the government, or provided for the public service, or abandon, or remit, or claim by or on behalf of the government, or a public service provided where the amount is $10,000 or more, and whereas the Fonseca Credit Cooperative Society Limited is indebted to the government in the sum of EC $546,264 with respect to the Mocha Housing Development Project, and whereas the Minister of Finance considers it necessary to write off the debt owed to the government by the Forsage Credit Cooperative Society Limited with respect to the Mocha Housing Development Project. Be it resolved that the Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to write off the debt in the sum of $546,264 EC dollars owed to the government by the Forsage Credit Cooperative Society Limited with respect to the Mocha Housing Development Project. Yes, Mr. President, if I can just quickly elaborate a little bit. This motion really is seeking to come to the rescue of a situation in the Soufrière-Fonséjac constituency where a loan owed to the government by the Credit Cooperative Society with respect to that development, as mentioned, Mocha development, needs to be taken care of. This move basically is two-pronged. In one respect, it is going to help the institution strengthen its financial capacity. It has given out a total of 26 loans, but of the 26 given, only 11 of them have been serviced. And these residents who have purchased small homes, they've made investments in there. Some of them don't have the capacity to repay those loans. Some of them, they need assistance. The credit union is not receiving the expected revenue, and the government sees that this is a move that will help the credit union improve its situation with its balance sheet, improve its capacity to be able to offer more services to the community, and to go into more productive lending. And the second aspect, as I said, it was two-pronged. The second aspect would be that this now allows the persons who are actually accessing the service, better living conditions, because they can now access the service that they otherwise would not have accessed. And those who have actually been paying the loans, or who have paid the loans, can now access deeds of sale for the properties that they've invested in. It is true that there are some persons who may be delinquent, and from time to time, we know that they are bad debtors, they don't pay their bills. Maybe there's a good example that we've learned from. When you don't pay your bills, it can cause problems for other people. But as a government, we don't encourage that. However, when it comes to vulnerable people who are trying, and they just cannot, and the institution has reached out on their behalf, the government that cares for people, the government that puts people first, sees that it's necessary to intervene. And instead of taking money to go and give, countless examples to friends and all those things, we think it's a very important initiative that this government intervenes and rescues a very small but very significant institution in the Soufrière-Fonséjac constituency and help those persons. So you're going to have two things happening, Mr. President. One, the institution itself will get some assistance to be able to survive, and the persons who are unable to meet their benefits, not because we want them to be delinquent, we're giving them a chance to say, look, 11 of you have been paying your loans, even if it's difficult, we are going to reward you. We are going to make sure that you now have title to your properties, deed of sale. You can own this. And for those of you who just couldn't pay, the credit union will be able to get some relief. So it really is a very important move, albeit small but significant. And that is a proper demonstration of what our government is about. And so I'm very happy. And I see a former representative of Soufrière-Fonséjac. I believe his heart is still there. And I'm sure inside he's very pleased. I see him blushing, his pink cheeks, blushing and being very grateful, and rightfully so, that the government has decided to help a situation for the people where he represented. I don't want to chastise him too much, but all I'll say to him is I wish his government had done the same earlier. It would have been a good investment, and he'd probably be on this side still. But, Mr. President, that's how it is. So I look forward to the support of this House for that initiative on behalf of the people of Soufrière-Fonséjac. I thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to rise just to make a very, very short contribution to this discussion. I support the motion to write off the debt of the Fonséjac Credit Cooperative Society. But in light, Mr. President, of the statements that were made with regard to the Banking Amendment Act, which was proposed in the lower house, and I know the intention is to go with a joint select committee to discuss that further. I think it's important at this point to recognize the contribution of credit unions to us, to our society as a whole, and the importance that they have and is going to continue to grow as banking becomes more and more restrictive or restricted. Credit unions are really the access point for many persons in this country to our financial system. And I would like to encourage the government to, and perhaps I should stop and just full disclosure, I have been a lifelong member of a credit union. I have served my credit union in a board capacity. So I'm invested in the credit union philosophy and the credit union movement. But I think it's important that we look as a country, and I'm suggesting to the government that they take the opportunity, whilst we're looking at the banking side of things, to look to see how we can safeguard and protect our credit union movement in St. Lucia, so that it becomes what it really can be, the bedrock of the financial institution for most persons in this country. Our banking has become more and more concentrated. It's become more and more concentrated overseas. And so we are losing a lot of the personal touch that made banking and facilitated banking in our country. And fortunately, the credit unions have been able to step into that gap. They are really a personalized and personal service where they get to know their members on an individual basis and can contribute to the welfare of their members on an individual basis. There have been moves for increased regulation, and I appreciate that regulation is necessary to make sure that credit unions operate properly and function properly and can continue to grow and survive. But I do not want to see a situation where we begin to regulate credit unions in the same manner as we regulate banks. And so therefore I'm encouraging and soliciting the government's support in looking at these things to see how we can develop an indigenous regulatory process to ensure that our credit unions remain independent, remain vibrant, and remain able to contribute to the economic development of our society. So again, I support this very timely assistance to the Fonséjac Credit Union, and I encourage the government to go further. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Stanislas.
Thank you, Mr. President. And again, I will not be very long on this one, but I stand to fully support the motion as presented by the leader of government business. This is a situation that is going to give the credit union, the Fonséjac Credit Union, some breathing space on the balance sheet, Mr. President, where, like the leader of opposition said, can lend some more help to the community of Soufrière-Fonséjac. This was a project, the Boca Housing Project was a project which started in 2011 after Hurricane Thomas caused a major destruction in Fonséjac. I think that there was about 4 or 5 deaths from that hurricane. And the government had to step in to create housing, to relocate persons who lose their homes, their property completely. And an agreement was made between the government and the credit union to facilitate the purchasing of houses to residents, but the land would have gone to the residents free of charge. They only had to pay the houses, and houses were of different amounts. I think from $5,000 to the biggest of them was about $60,000. And like he amply said, that you have some delinquent payers, And I'm hoping that with the possibility of them getting title to the lands, they'll make a more concerted effort to make whatever contribution it is towards payment of the mortgage, so that could further enhance the capacity of the credit union to do a lot better. This is a very, very good resolution. I fully support it, and I want to commend the government in coming forward to assist in the Fonsejak Credit Union and the people of Soufrière Fonsejak. Thank you very much.
Senator Prosper? Or is it Antoine Prosper?
Antoine Prosper.
Antoine Prosper.
Mr. President, I think it would be remiss of me as a resident of Fonsejak not to add my voice to this resolution. I stand in support of the resolution because on the morning after the disaster, I woke up in Fonsejak. And at the time, many people thought that Fonsejak had disappeared from the map. And I had to make a concerted effort to contact my family to let them know that I was alive. I witnessed the dead bodies on the ground and all the destruction on that morning. So I understand how the Fonsejak, the board of the Fonsejak Credit Union felt at the time when they made the commitment to assist the government in providing housing for so many residents who had lost their homes, they had lost a livelihood, because the Fonsejak Credit Union really depends on the farmers from the community to thrive. And many of them had lost their gardens, they had lost everything that they had. And so I am very pleased that a caring government, the government of the St. Lucia Labour Party, has found it fitting to relieve the Fonsejak Credit Union of the burden, because at the time they really thought that the residents would have been able to service their loans. But if we understand what poor people go through, they had to start life again, and it was very difficult, and some of them are still struggling to pay the loans, and this is why the credit union itself was not able to to pay to the government the amount that they had agreed upon. And so today, I wish to applaud the government for this bold move for the people of Soufrière Fonsejak. And let me say again that I wish that my colleague on the other side had seen wisdom in relieving the Fonsejak Credit Union of that burden. If the people themselves cannot save at the credit union cannot thrive. And so today, I stand in full support of that resolution. Thank you very much.
Senator, Head of Government Business.
Yes.
You have explained the...
Just a closing statement. Mr. President,
I thought you had done that already.
Sorry?
I thought you had done that already.
No, this is for this motion.
Go ahead, sir.
Yes. Mr. President, I just wanted to make an observation. First of all, let me thank the Honorable Senator for his contribution, and as well as the Honorable Senator, the Independent Senator, for his words of encouragement and advice. But there's one thing I've noted, and I wanted to make sure we take note of it before we go to the bill. As we went on today, there's something I realized. The opposition, they've come around. We started by saying that all this thing about borrowing from the first motion, but we have gotten to the point where they've gradually gotten to the point that they support what we're doing. So supporting this situation in Fonsejak, don't forget the government had to borrow money to deal with it. So I think they've finally come down to earth, and we're dealing with the reality, and I want to thank them immensely for agreeing that we, in this government, when we borrow for a good cause. Just to ensure that I said so, Mr. President, instead of writing off and throwing away everything that we don't think makes a profit. in this country, they have finally come home and supported openly the motion where we are borrowing money for a good cause. Thank you, Mr. President.
Be it resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister for Finance to write off the debt in the sum of EC $546,264 owed to the government by the Fonds Jacques Credit Cooperative Society Limited with respect to the Mocha Housing Development Project. I now put the question. As many ayes are of that opinion, say aye. As many ayes are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Bills, Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, I beg to present the first reading of a bill shortly entitled International Bank Amendment.
International Banks Amendment.
Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, I beg for the suspension of Standing Order 48.2 to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at the sitting.
Senators, the question is that Standing Order number 49.2 be suspended in order to allow the Honourable Leader of Government Business to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many ayes are of that opinion, say aye. As many ayes are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The leave is granted. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I beg to move for second reading a bill shortly entitled International Banks Amendment. Mr. President, this bill for consideration seeks to provide an enhancement for the regulation of supervising of the banking business. And it really is to establish a single space banking and the ownership structures for licensed financial institutions. Mr. President, there are some amendments being proposed, and the amendment to this legislation really seeks to facilitate the further advancement and harmonization of the banking sector in the Eastern Caribbean Union, the ECCU. And that will in turn supplement the strengthening of a legal framework for the conduct of banking business and a regulatory environment that will be enhanced. The amendments proposed, Mr. President, to the Banking Act have all emanated from reviews conducted by the ECCU, and the intention is to update the Act and make it easier to understand, to improve its language, and to improve the accuracy of the Act by way of definitions. Just by example, Mr. President, we have the amendments to Section 44 of the Act. It specifies that the licensed financial institution must maintain a minimum paid up or assigned capital in the currency union and not only in St. Lucia. A new subsection 5, Mr. President, is also included to empower the ECCB to approve the holding of assigned capital in the form of specified assets. Mr. President, Section 45 is amended to insert two new practices in which a licensed financial institution or licensed financial holding company should not be engaged to maintain the reserve fund under subsection 2. In addition, Mr. President, two new subsections 3, 4, and 5 are inserted in which a licensed financial institution or a licensed financial holding company shall not declare or make transfer from its profits if it realizes a net loss for a financial year unless it obtains prior written approval of the central bank within the specified timeline. Mr. President, there is an amendment also to increase the permissible years of consecutive service of an external auditor for 6 years to 9 years, and to provide that the lead and concurring audit partner shall be changed every 6 years, and that is being proposed. The strengthened remedial action tools and adopted mechanisms to allow for resolution of different banking matters are some of the pertinent measures which this bill seeks to address. And as well, Mr. President, to improve the corporate governance framework for financial institutions within the currency union. And finally, Mr. President, this part of the ECCU harmonized legislation, of the ECCU harmonized legislation. As a member, St. Lucia, which is a member, is required to enact these amendments. And so we have to do so to be compliant. And so with that in mind, these few notes just shared, I look for the concurrence and support of this Senate for...
That's the wrong one. We're doing the International Banking Amendment Bill. Mm-hmm.
Mr. President, if you'll allow me just to
Please do.
rectify, yes, a couple of things there. I think some of the content I just provided would be more appropriate for another bill. So I just want to retract a little and get a couple of things sorted out. So I will use a different or more reliable source.
You are now referring to the International
Banking Amendments, yes.
Yes.
So apologize for the previous, yes. I don't know if it's because of the time of the... Anyhow, so the bill for consideration, Mr. President, which is the International Banks Amendment. This bill provides the amendment of the International Banks Cap, Act 1217, which is known as the Act. Clause 1 of the bill provides for the short title and commencement, and Clause 2 of the bill provides for the interpretation. In Clause 3, the bill section 2 of the Act, interpretation is amended to include two new definitions for the terms effective consolidated supervision, financial services regulator, shell bank, and physical presence. Clause 4 of the bill amends Section 5.1 of the Act, registered office and registered agent, by including the words physical presence after the words unless it has. This amendment seeks to provide that a license can only be issued where the physical presence of an eligible company operating a registered office in St. Lucia can be established. Mr. President, in Clause 5 of the bill, Section 10 of the Act, limitation on activities. This is amended by substituting the words in connection with the business is connected to clarify the activities that the licensee is prohibited from undertaking. The amendment also provides for the insertion of a new subsection 2 that prohibits a licensed operating an international banking business in St. Lucia from establishing or continuing business relations with a shell bank. So, Mr. President, these brief notes provide a little bit of background and context for the bill before us, and I look forward to our contributions and approval for this bill. Thank you.
Senators, the question is that the International Banks Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the International Banks Act, Cap 12.17.
Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 3.
Amendment of Section 2.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill. Clause 4.
Amendment of Section 5.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill. Clause 5.
Substitution of Section 10.
Clause 5 stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Senators, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Senators, I beg to report that the International Banks Amendment Bill went through committee stage without amendments. Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and that the bill be read a third time and passed.
Senators, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the International Banks Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many as are that opinion say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. I guess the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the International Banks Amendment Act 2022.
Is there government business?
Mr. President, I move that this Senate do stand adjourned, sign a deal.
What did you say? No,
I'm hoping you heard, Mr. President. I'm not sure I can say it twice.
Senators, the question is, this Senate to stand adjourned. Sign it aye. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. This sitting is adjourned.